Amen. Listen to the gospel of Jesus Christ according to Mark.
Glory be to you, O Lord.
And the Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness. He was in the wilderness 40 days, tempted by Satan. And he was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him. This is the good news.
Praise be to you, O Christ.
And I invite you again to turn in your bulletins and join me in the response to the word. No cop-out.
No cheat.
In the wilderness, beyond his strength.
Humility depends on God.
Don't you
Be afraid.
to seek the help you need.
If you find the angels with
Amen. So Jesus goes into the desert, into the wasteland. That's the same word in Greek, desert, wilderness, wasteland. But Jesus is already in the wilderness. I know I glossed over it, so may we not forget. This whole scene has been taking place in the wilderness, the desert. Verse 3, a voice of one calling in the desert. Verse 4, so John came baptizing in the desert region. Verse 5, the whole Judean countryside and all the people of Jerusalem went out. Verse 12, at once the Spirit sent him out into the desert, the wilderness. To contextualize ourselves again, remember, Christianity did not start with a new book. Christianity began with a new message about that God already known and now being made known in Jesus Christ. So Mark makes clear in the telling of his story that his new message very much carries the same themes of the God the Jewish people knew for centuries. We talked last week about the theme of the weirdo prophets that takes us clearly back to our Jewish heritage. Wilderness times are another very clear tie back to our Jewish faith heritage. The voice in the wilderness, John in the wilderness, country and city folk in the wilderness, Jesus coming out to the wilderness and going again into the wilderness. Mark, in just 13 verses, wants us to see that link, wants us to remember our ancient stories of wilderness times. And that's a good thing, because salvation typically comes from the wilderness. Now that can seem kind of like a cruel concept. Wilderness is defined as a place of hardship. Why then is it necessary for salvation? Isn't that just cruel? Well, that's certainly one perspective a person could take. But another perspective to take is to recognize the reality of life, that wilderness moments come. That's just the way life is. So acknowledging that, we can see beauty in the fact that we can find salvation, even and especially in those darkest, most wildly out of control times. And let's face it, it's those moments in life when life is most wildly out of control, when we feel as if the whole world has become a wilderness around us. Creatures threatening to attack from every dark shadow. It's those moments of primal fear that drive us to again see just how clearly we are in need of being saved. Salvation comes from the wilderness, a challenging lesson, full of beautiful grace. Wilderness moments come in life. Now they can be chosen moments of wilderness, or they can be forced moments of wilderness. In 13 verses, Mark gives us examples of both. The people of Judea and Jerusalem have gone into the wilderness willingly. There is power in that action. When religious communities or John the Baptist withdraw into the wilderness to prepare the way of the Lord, they're testifying against the corruption of their larger society. The intentional withdrawal into the wilderness is an acknowledgement that life has become too crowded to see clearly the right priorities. The intentional withdrawal into the wilderness is the acknowledgement of just how much the dirt of the world's yuckiness is built up on you, despite how much you've tried to be in but not of it. The intentional withdrawal into the wilderness is the acknowledgement that we can see the way to God a little better if we clear away a bit of the clutter of our everyday lives. When folks go away on retreats or take time without schedules to be kept, take time away from appointments to be made, that intentional withdrawal to a lack of structure. Salvation is found in those moments. The freedom from over-control sticks with us and helps us to live more intentionally after re-entry into the real world. Like shoveling a sidewalk buried under 4 feet of snow that has become invisible, intentional wilderness time again refocuses us to see just how clearly that pathway of walking with God to building the kingdom, we see again how clearly that path has been there all along. Each step away from the hustle and bustle is like another shovel full of snow removed, revealing that straight path God has been trying to use to get to you all along. But not all of the times in our lives that feel like wilderness moments are chosen times. I'm sure many, if not all of us, have gotten to a point in life where the whole world around you seems to have suddenly turned into a wilderness. The demands of everyday life take on the feel of beasts attacking in the night. The demands of work and family and the frailty of our bodies, they can become so overwhelming and disorienting that each day feels like stepping into a complete unknown. A desolate desert with no hope of finding what's needed without tremendous fight and effort. With the state of our economy, the state of the violence and irrationality, the awful stories on the news every night, it seems as if the whole world has become a source of fear. Fear that creeps into our homes where we don't even feel safe anymore. Many of us, I'm sure, have felt at times that the world you live in is a wilderness. Jesus was already out in the wilderness, but the Spirit provoked him even further. Jesus' experience was not self-chosen. He was driven to wilderness, driven to aloneness. Another moment of Jesus' life we take comfort in because we know he has shared our moments of feeling totally alone in the world. And as Christians, we look to Jesus' story to learn how to get through our wilderness moments. We look to our sacred stories as those through the centuries to gain a wisdom that has borne itself out through the ages. But we know Mark's several allusions in the first few verses. We remember Jesus's is not our faith heritage's First, wilderness story. We can't read Jesus' wilderness story without thinking about the Israelites' wilderness story. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness. The Israelites spent 40 years in the wilderness. Of course, the Israelites kept messing up. Even though they'd been delivered from Pharaoh's army, the Israelites still lacked faith and believed God would leave them to die in the wilderness. Even though they can see God's presence on Mount Sinai in thundercloud and trumpet blast, the Israelites lacked faith and assume Moses has perished and persuade Aaron to make the golden calf idol. The Israelites spent 40 years making and recovering from their mistakes in the wilderness. So Jesus' 40 days stands in contrast to the Israelites. Regardless of what we think about whether Jesus was a sinner at some point, this is post-baptism. And from here on out, Jesus is our man to follow. So while the Israelites failed in the wilderness, we believe we can look to Jesus to get it right. And Mark doesn't waste any ink explaining the right way to be in the wilderness. A very short description of our famous Lent story. Mark gives us only 2 verses, where Matthew needs 11 and Luke uses 13. Here it is. And at once the Spirit drove him into the desert, and he remained there 40 days, and was put to the test by Satan. He was with the wild animals, and the angels looked after him. That's it. He was with the wild animals, and the angels took care of him. Now, I want to see how many of you can remember way back to a few weeks ago when I talked about the Greek word angelos. That's the word for angel in Greek, angelos. It's a word we've already encountered in Mark's gospel in the 2nd verse, when he talks about God sending messengers. Angelos, angels, messengers, the same Greek word. We learned in verse 2, Mark's message is a message of messengers. The good news for Mark doesn't begin with a baby, but with messengers. He was with the wild animals, and the angels, the messengers, took care of him. Wilderness seems to be defined by control. The wilderness, the desert, is a place where control hasn't yet been established. He was with the wild animals, and the angels, the messengers, took care of him. Now, I don't know about you, but more and more it seems like we live in a world where wild animals are lurking all around. And yet the messengers, the angels of the Lord, also seem to keep appearing, caring for those truly in need. He was with the wild animals, and the angels, the messengers, took care of him. Mark has already told us in verse 2, the messengers come. We learn from Jesus that these messengers, these angels, their care for us, that is what gets us through the wilderness times. Now, not every community needs to hear this message, especially in our world and culture where way too many love a free ride and feel way too entitled. But this is a message for this community. Let the angels help you. Let the messengers serve you. Wilderness experiences are all about control. whether by choice or by the force of life's circumstances, we see again very clearly what we are able to control and what is truly beyond our control. Surviving in the wilderness takes a faith. Will you be the one who will fix the whole world and restore its order? Will you force yourself to get it all together? We have a culture that does tend to pride doing it on your own, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. But Jesus, amid the wild animals, was taken care of by angels, by the messengers. How could we ever think we could do it all alone if even Jesus himself let himself be taken care of? Sometimes the most beautiful way to show your faith is to accept help. When you feel yourself wandering in the wilderness, when you feel like life has become a desert wasteland, will you compromise yourself and scheme to find your own way out, however immoral? Or will you in faith wait for the angels? Wilderness moments come, but salvation comes from the wilderness. God has filled the world with wild animals and with messengers, with angels. Which will you be? And which will you see? The messengers, the angels are sent to us and are us. The way of the world is to succumb to the wild animals or become one of them. The testimony of Jesus is a faith in God to wait for the angels. A faith in God strong enough to rely on the messengers. God works it all for good, for those who have faith. It is not easy, but it is worth it. And nothing else is worth it. Amen.